We're down to our final breakout session of the day, and so if our speakers are making their way forward, we're going to end today by talking about, or the breakout sessions, with sharing space with other organizations and creating revenue. So the three people I have making their way up here. You go ahead and say. Yeah. Are you first, Kathleen? Okay. First up is Kathleen Marker. She's the CEO of the YWCA Northeast Kansas. Also joining her will be Martha Kamber, the CEO of YWCA Brooklyn, and Kim Burke, the principal of the Craddock group. So we're on a time frame to get out of here and party, so take it away, Kathleen.
That's great because I talk fast, and I also know that it's the end of the day and it's going to be hard to get everybody's attention. So I feel a little bit like the little red engine that could, because I come from a pretty small YWCA organization. So we were founded in, whoops, let me find my, yeah. I figure out how to use this thing. Yeah. So we were founded 131 years ago in the capital city of Kansas, Topeka. Like most YWCAs, we have adapted our programming over the years based on the needs of the women in our community. And when we started in our first building, we were a boarding house in the downtown area. That building still exists, and that building looks like it's in great shape. It's been very well maintained. So we have a budget of $2.6 million. We have 30 full-time staff, and I want to tell you in that 30 full-time staff that 21 of them work in our Center for Safety and Empowerment. So they're serving victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking. So that leaves 5 folks in our youth services programming and our child care center that we have on our site. So that leaves 3 people in the administrative office. So when I heard earlier about, do you have a facilities manager? That's me. Do you have an HR person? Yep, that's me. And yes, I do go out and I shovel snow at times. So we have 60 part-time folks that are working for us as well, delivering our before and after school programming to our most at-risk kids. So these are the services that we offer that I just mentioned. We have our challenge. Our challenge is that we had a building that was constructed in 1975, and in addition to that building, about 10 years, 11 years later in 1986. So 30 years later, we're challenged with debt and an aging 59,000 square foot building. And we were focusing a lot of our financial capital and our human capital on servicing the building, servicing a sports arena, a swimming pool, a nice running track, and we really were not profiting off of that piece of what we were doing. Our programs that we were offering that really speak to our mission really seem secondary. So our board of directors decided to sell the sports arena and the pool to a fitness group. Doing that in 2014, they first leased it to them, and they did that over a period of a couple of years. After that point in time, they actually condominiumized the building, so we didn't lose our 501(c) status in terms of being tax-free on the building. And we signed a joint use agreement covering the maintenance in the common area, the boilers, and the sharing of the utilities in the building. So the effect of that is, if you look at this, and I don't know that there's a pointer on here. Yeah, there is. So this is the south entrance, and you see it says YWCA, and here it says Great Life. Over here, this is the north side of the building, our entrance, and here on the west side, these are our offices up here, and down below, it's kind of shady, you can't see it, but those are windows that overlook the track. And so physically, we are in the same building. And just like you don't get to choose, your relatives, that uncle that has completely different views than you do, we didn't get to choose our neighbor here, but we do have to live with them. So here are the advantages that we had by making that sale. We were able to pay off the debt that we had. We were able to build some reserves, which improved our liquidity. We reduced our operating costs, the utilities not having any interest expense. The shared building maintenance took place as well. So that was definitely a plus. Of course, hindsight is always 20/20. And when we think about what that looks like today, our board of directors can say that it looks a little bit different. One of the things that we were able to do at the sale is we also had a lot of deferred maintenance on the building. And so we were able to replace the roof, and the cost to replace the roof on that building was then shared with our co-owner of the building, and that was a part of the agreement. Some of the difficulties that we experienced was branding. It was a decision that was made with that board of directors to sell the name Great Life at the YWCA. And that confusion with senior previous members of the YWCA who use the sports arena and the swimming pool is that they think they're still giving to the YWCA. So there are some things that we're trying to work on there. So shared space but not shared values has caused us some public relation issues. In June, there was a couple that went to join the Great Life Association. When they asked to join the association, they were asked to provide a marriage license. This was a same-sex couple. The next morning at 6 o'clock, my phone is buzzing. I roll over, I look at my phone, and I thought, we've got a media crisis here. So we had all kinds of folks who thought the YWCA was discriminating against the same-sex couple. It was very clear that their policies are clearly institutional racism and institutional gender discrimination. And so as the course of the day, we had to develop a press release. We had to notify all of our board members. We had to get out in front of it. We also had to make sure that all of the negative conversation that was going on, that they understood that that was not the YWCA, that that was Great Life. And so we put out a press release, and within an hour we had all 3 media outlets at our building and interviewing our Great Life owners and interviewing me. So at the end of the day, we got the result that we wanted. The 2 women who had been discriminated against had made several social media posts saying, hey folks, this was not the YWCA, our bad. But they had taken a picture of themselves in front of the sign that said YWCA, so that created the problem. So if we look at what we're doing today, we probably would not have sold that name. You know, the cost to do that was $50,000 over a 10-year period, and they get to use our name for the rest of the time that they are in existence. I'm sure at the time the board of directors thought this was cash that would be coming back into the organization. It would make a lot of sense. The discussion on the branding would have been more in depth. I just came this last Saturday from our strategic planning meeting, our retreat with our board, and it was discovered by one of our board members that as they are doing direct deposit or direct debit ACHs for their members, what comes up in the line says YWCA. It does not say Great Life. So people think that they are actually contributing to a program of the YWCA. So those are some things that we have to clear out. One of the things that we decided in the agreement that was put together at the very beginning in terms of the common maintenance of the building was how the utilities would be shared. And it was agreed that their organization would have a study done to figure out how to split the utilities in this building. And we found out that that was nearly impossible. In an old building where there was an addition and we both were taking advantage of that addition, we both had new space in that addition, it was complicated. So we instead had a study done by engineers to say, here's the amount of usage being used, and it was not based on square footage, it was based on cubic square foot, because you can think a sports arena has a lot more space than the offices that we have on the second floor. And then, of course, the amount of water that was being used and the amount of energy that was being used to heat the pool. And so as a percentage, that changed, and we agreed upon that. I would expect in the next year we're going to have lots of conversation about the usage of the name that they're using and how that looks. We have, as I said, we're very limited in terms of staff, but we do have a very strong building and grounds committee with people who have the expertise. And so we're going to be reviewing the contracts, we're going to be reviewing how we operate the building together and how we get along as neighbors. I have to tell you that even though we don't share the same values, we do get along in other ways. They allow us to use the swimming pool, so our children in our center can go downstairs and have swimming lessons, so they are allowed to use the pool at no cost. In hindsight, we sold off a gym that is on the second floor, and it's right next to our dining room. So every time we have a network luncheon, we're competing with the sound of basketballs reverberating against the wall. That's not something anybody gave any thought to. We know that we have probably about $2 million worth of work that's going to be done on that building. We have made the decision that we are probably not going to go into debt for this, that that's not something we really can afford to do, but we are going to have to raise the funds and apply for grants to get those renovations taken care of. HVAC system, like I said, is over 30 years old. We have boilers, so we're going to have to take a look at how we can replace those boilers with something that's much more energy efficient. And so those are kind of the processes that we're going through right now, and I would say, you know, I was not there at the time all of this was taking place, so it's easy for me to look at it in a different perspective. But I will tell you, in our strategic planning meeting with our board, if 2 years ago I would have thought they could have had a conversation about, is this building the right fit for us, that conversation would not have happened. This last Saturday, that was part of the conversation. Let's evaluate that. Let's take a look at this building. So I don't want to take up too much time here.
I just want to ask a quick question, if I may.
Sure.
Only because there was a little bit of discussion back here. And I would like to invite you and the board to reach out to us, because we do have to have a conversation on the trademark. Aside from our assets, which are the buildings, the next big asset that we have is our trademark. So again, I was not here either, so we are all trying to make this work. But I will tell you that as it relates to some of the policies that we're putting in place as YWCA USA, it's protecting our trademark because it is our brand and our standing in our community. So I know that there's a lot to clean up as we all talk about YWCA foundations and whatnot, but it is a work that we are very invested in taking a look at because of these unintended consequences.
Yeah, and I believe that kind of support can help us as we move forward with them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me? And now for something completely different. What? How many of you have a VA in your community? Right, Department of Veterans Affairs, big VA hospital. I know the Dayton people certainly do. Well, I'm going to be telling you a story about the VA, which has a lot of the same sort of mission goals and issues that you have on a very different scale. But it's a good news story that I'm hoping you can learn some lessons from. And we're going to go really quickly to quote, I'm going to be quoting some people earlier in the day, especially Jesse. Be good, be brief, and be gone, right? So what I'm going to do is be really good and brief, and we're going to go through this quickly. And then Sarah's going to arrange a webcast for you to get more information if you want it on your own, whenever you have more time for the members. So my name is Kim Burke. I'm with the Craddock Group. I used to work for the federal government at the Office of Management and Budget. Ooh, I know. But now I work on programs with the Department of Veterans Affairs, especially with homeless veterans programs, which is my go button. This one. good. So I'm going to be talking about a program called Enhanced Use Leasing. Those of you that have VA campuses in your area, how many of you can have driven past them and seen, hey, there's like an empty building and it's still sitting there empty? Or look at that piece of land, it's just sitting there, right? Do you remember when Mary Ann was talking about earlier, she was saying, hey, what are my options for the building? Well, VA does the same thing as Mary Ann was talking about. How do we look at our options? And so they identified some vacant and underutilized land, and they said, hey, what if we were to ground this to an entity, in this case a developer, and we had some folks talk about, getting the right developer on board and getting expertise for that, and who finances, develops, renovates, and constructs and operates housing. It's supportive housing. It's for homeless veterans. It's for their families. It includes a lot of the same sort of services that you have. VA does not fund the housing development or the operations, and we're going to talk about how that funding comes through. They do refer veterans for housing through their homeless programs, and they do monitor the housing operations, but they are not the financer. So overall, what happened was VA took a look at their entire portfolio, much like the survey that you guys did, to say, all right, where are there holes? How can we figure out how to use this real estate in a way that benefits the veterans? Because they knew they had a lot of kind of empty real estate there. And so what they did was they stratified it, and they looked at where the mission goals dictated. How many times did we hear Shannon and Jesse say story, mission, urgency? Where do we have a mission need to create this housing? And that's where they focused. And if you look at, Kathleen was just talking about some of these same services, case management, job training, recreational programs. They need to provide all these services in the housing. And they ask the developers, if you remember, the developers have these abilities and they have access to the capacity to do that. So how it happens when they do these ground leases, and we'll talk about some examples so you can kind of see them come to life, is that they ground lease the land, developer develops it, they have an operator, generally a nonprofit operator, come in and do the operations. And right now, they have 99 of them going, 47 operational as housing EULs nationwide with 3,000 units of housing. And they've raised 513 in private capital. Remember, we were talking about private capital. We talked a lot about low-income housing tax credits and other capital, bringing in the right expertise to do this. So here, let's talk about an example, because it's always easier to see things when you look at it as an example. Wow, that was me. So Sepulveda, anyone from California here? Are you familiar with this project at all? It's permanent supportive housing. They did a solicitation looking for a developer to come in and build 73 and plus 76 units of permanent supportive housing. In this case, it's for veterans only. In many cases, it's also for veterans' families. The program is not exclusive to veterans. And it's fully operational, and so you'll see as we talk about who participates in the program. In general, it's a developer that comes in, and the developer can also be the operator. But in this case, New Directions and Community Friends do the operations long term of the housing and the supportive services. Menlo is another example. This one in this case, Core Affordable. Did 60 units of permanent supportive housing for homeless veterans and veterans at risk of homelessness. You'll see a lot of these projects that VA does are in California. We're working on one right now in West Los Angeles for 1,500 units of housing. There are some other projects that we do that VA has done in the past. Isaac was just talking about, and Monique, about energy projects. We've done some energy leases under this program, where the VA has been able to enhance use lease their energy projects, and we also do what he was talking about, the ESCO, the energy savings performance contracts there as well. And in some cases, the law allows for other uses besides housing, and in fact in Minneapolis there's housing units and a credit union, so sometimes there are supportive services, especially in West Los Angeles they're going to have supportive services as well. And you might be saying, well, that's all well and good, but where does the money come from, right? Well, let's talk about the money for specific to the housing projects themselves. Who remembers earlier today around lunchtime, low-income housing tax credits? That's one of the biggest ones. And if you recall what Shannon was saying, the commitment is short. Okay, anyone? No, the commitment is long. These projects take a long time to get off the ground. You have to be patient. You have to have patient capital. You have to have developers and advisors who can help you do this. Where are some of the other sources of funds? You remember Charles this morning was talking about, well, the developer has to kind of give something. And in this case, what the developer does is they defer their fee. So they basically do they basically do the project, and you can see that about 2% of the capital comes from that. Again, for the housing projects themselves, there are state funds. VA has the ability to make capital contributions, but to a large extent, the biggest source of funding are those low-income housing tax credits that you guys have been hearing about a lot today. And I know I'm going really fast, and I apologize, but I'm trying to be bold here. Now, then you say, okay, now that it's built, now what, right? Because everybody, you have to be able to operate the housing. And how do we get those funds? Well, in some cases they use the HUD VASH. Are you familiar with the HUD, voucher program, Section 8? And in some cases they have choice, project-based housing choice vouchers. And if you see that purple part up in the corner, who remember when Simone was saying this morning about market-based units in St. Matthew's Church? Remember that? Yep. Sometimes these units are cross-subsidized by having market-based, unsubsidized units in the building, so that they can use the revenue for the operating funds for the other units. Much like the air rights that Simone was talking about this morning. Finally, see, I told you I'd get you done, Martha. I told you. Who's worked with the VA in these programs? It seems like there's a lot of them. How many of you recognize at least one name on this list? Right? Same sort of folks that you do. A couple of lessons learned here is that VA, what they did when they started this was they decided to do it as a program. The VA has all those hospitals all across the country, and instead of trying to let each one of them just go out and do their own thing, they do let them have control over what happens to those assets, but they also did something centrally to make it happen. That way the market had more developers come in, they were able to get more interest, they were able to generate interest in the program so that it became a VA-wide initiative as opposed to just the one little project in each individual VA. And it also allowed them to go to Wall Street and help market the program to bring in the capital under the low-income housing tax credit program, as well as deal with HUD. So VA, can centrally, deal with HUD. So we're going to save our questions, I think, until after Martha's done. But I know it's fast, and we will have another session in case anybody would be interested. Would anybody be interested in learning just a little bit more about these projects as a precedent for you guys? All right, so Sarah's gonna set that up. Thank you.
So it's my job to keep you awake for another 29 minutes. I'm going to also go through my presentation pretty quickly because I'd like to leave maybe 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. And what time does the bus come?
We're going to end by 4:10, so we can be done by
Okay, great. So we have time. So I'm not going to talk about our building today. Many of you have heard me tell the story of how we saved our building. Those of you who haven't, if you heard Shannon's story this morning, it's identical. This is our building. It was built in 1926. It's 180,000 square feet. I have been there for 12 years, and we were able to repurpose our building. We have 11 floors. We ended up taking out the gym and the pool and building 4 additional floors of affordable housing for women. So we now have 9 floors, both single room occupancy and studio apartments. 302 units. It's on the top 9 floors of the building. We have on the lower 2 floors is the community center, which is now used by about 100 nonprofits, 25,000 people last year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sharing space both with organizations that are using your space for events or programming or activities, but also Brooklyn is a gentrifying borough, and one of the things that we were observing is that a lot of grassroots nonprofits that were doing really great work couldn't afford to be in Brooklyn anymore. And so there are huge pockets of poverty in Brooklyn, but office and program space is very expensive. And a lot of these small grassroots nonprofits were like in broom closets and school basements and really trying to improvise. So we wanted to create a nexus for progressive, social justice, grassroots nonprofits, and we invited about a half a dozen organizations. We started off just with organizations serving women and girls, and said, you know, we move into our building permanently, we'll give you office and program space, they pay rent, it's a very reasonable rent, and the goal there was to really kind of create a nexus of progressive civic engagement in downtown Brooklyn. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Working with 100 organizations is really difficult. It's a wonderful model, but I've made pretty much, they always invite me to talk because it's always like, tell us everything we shouldn't do because it's every mistake that I've made, right? Somebody said that to me this morning, oh, you're talking great, I love to hear all about your mistakes. I always say I was uniquely unqualified for this job because I had never managed a facility, didn't know anything about construction or capital fundraising or anything. So I'm going to talk about all my mistakes. Here we go. In addition to the housing, we have college access and leadership program for low-income girls of color. Education, job readiness, and legal assistance for immigrant women, the Social Justice Community Center, which I just mentioned, and a lot of advocacy and policy work. So these are some of the things that we benefited from. In terms of our community partnerships, we were able to reach a lot more people and really get the word out about who we were. And that was really important because we had been in a period of about 10 years of decline, and our reputation and standing in the community had really declined. So bringing all these organizations in and opening up the building to civic groups in downtown Brooklyn kind of put us back on the map. You know, the Chamber of Commerce started meeting at our building, and the community board, and you know, the city, the mayor has town hall meetings in our building. So it really put us back on the map in a way that we needed at that time. We were also able to bring in organizations that complemented what we were doing. So this group provides free legal services to undocumented immigrants, and we have an education program for women immigrants. So they're coming in and doing workshops on immigration and know your rights, et cetera. We really tried to choose nonprofits that complemented what we were already doing and provided a service that we didn't have the skill set for. So some of the mistakes we made early on. We had a big nonprofit tenant that did domestic violence work that went under, and they were paying about $60,000 a year rent. So, and like went under suddenly, like one day they just didn't come into work. So making sure that we're, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on, but making sure that you're not counting on one partner to be able to cover your operating costs is really important. We spent a lot of time looking at people's financials, and I brought my CFO in. We looked at long-term projections. And in a couple of cases, we actually asked people to give an additional month's security deposit because we were worried. Most of the organizations that have moved into the building have done very well. I think in the since 2009, I think 2 actually went under, the rest were okay. The compliance piece here is really important for people who have tax credits. If you're renting out your space and it's funded through tax credits, you have to make sure that, I mean, in our case, it was restricted for community use, right? So you have to be careful if you're renting out your meeting room to, you know, I don't know, Citibank, right, or one of your offices, that's not considered community use. So just making sure that if you are renting out space, that you're fulfilling the requirements of your regulatory agencies if you have them. We talked about this. Our building, like everybody else's, was falling down around us and was really underutilized. There were just like floors of empty offices with lead paint and asbestos insulated pipes, right? One of the things that we've looked at a lot is how do we contribute to the sustainability, the vitality of our community, especially a community that's gentrifying. So we have 2 community-supported agriculture projects in the building. We have a farmer, a Mexican woman farmer in upstate New York. We're a big CSA where we basically, if you're not familiar with the CSAs, you buy shares in the before planting in the early part of the year, and then you get a delivery of fresh fruits and vegetables every week from that farm all the way through October from the beginning of the growing season. So this was an interesting project because it brought together more affluent neighbors who were interested in CSA, our residents who are low income, and some of the ESOL students and some of the high school girls in our college access program. And they're all working together on this project. They're doing potlucks, and this was a trip to Anna's farm that they all went on together. It's an interesting way to bring the community together, and I think one of the things that I really struggled with as the community gentrified is how do we stay relevant to a more affluent community that doesn't really need us in the same way that the old community did. You know, we've got 300 low-income women who are 88% of the women who live at the YWCA self-report as trauma survivors, mostly domestic violence, sexual assault. So we knew that we were providing them with a service that they really needed, but our surrounding community didn't like us very much, and so they were, you know, writing letters to elected officials saying that we were a blight, we were bringing down their property values. So I had to figure out something to draw them in, and this actually, these kinds of projects really helped a lot. So I heard all of these stories. I think it's really helpful to have one lead organization and just to have that set up from the beginning, who really is responsible for the toilet that's leaking at 11 o'clock on Saturday night, right? And for us, I really liked being the owner of the building where we could make sure that things got done in a timely manner and got done well. I know there are shared models and someone else might be able to speak to that. But I did find it a lot easier to have to like know who was in charge, right, and who to call. So this is really, really important. All of these things are self-explanatory, of course. The synergy piece is really important, right? It's like, do you feel a connection to this group? I'm going to talk about the theater in a minute, and you'll see that in practice. And the leadership piece is important. So if that executive director leaves, like, is their board in agreement with whatever you've discussed with the executive director? Do they know what that is? Is there, you know, real leadership support for this? And we have had, by the way, a significant amount of transition of leadership of the organizations in the building. So making sure that you know board members and other leadership folks in the organization is really helpful. This is also really important. So one of the mistakes that I made was I thought that we would all come together and work collaboratively, and that the nonprofits in the building would be really interested in doing shared programming and taking advantage of all these other wonderful women's organizations in the building. And that did not happen. It was very siloed. What we expected as collaboration and what they thought of collaboration was very, very different. And there wasn't, I tried everything. I tried brown bag lunches, I tried having speakers, I tried wine and cheese parties, I tried everything. So now when someone moves into the building, we actually have an agreement that we do that's like an addendum to their lease. So we expect to do collaborative programming, and that is this number of sessions every month with this population. So very, very clear in terms of what we want to get out of this, whether, let's say it was the Know Your Rights immigration workshops once a month, right, or whatever it is that we're expecting. So making sure that that's understood. Don't just say we're going to do collaborative work, because everybody has a different understanding. Like one group was in the building for years, and they said, well, we gave you like new sneakers for the residents one year for Christmas. And they were serious. They thought that was, they had fulfilled their compliance there. Make sure that you're getting something out of this, and it has to be something where you both really, you're giving them something that they need, and they're giving you something that you need. The trust piece is really important. If there's a way that you can work with groups before you make a commitment to them, that's wonderful, like on some kind of a collaborative project, you can get to know them. Do they play nice with others? Is really, really helpful to know before they're in your building with a lease. And then the how decision making, getting back to this whole, working collaboratively. We found that, executive directors, we all think we know how to do things the best way, right? So if you have 10 executive directors in the building and you're trying to work on something collaboratively, everybody thinks that they know how to do it. So this whole idea that people are coming into the building, that we're talking about collaboration before they get there, and we're talking about, there are no superstars here, like we all have to put our egos aside and work together. That was hard, I'm going to be honest with you. There were some prickly personalities. We do try to stay in communication. That helps a lot, whether it's little memos or newsletters, or you're inviting them to regular events. But building that relationship is very important, because then when the boiler goes out in January, they're a lot more forgiving, because they know you and they know you're doing the best you can, as opposed to having no contact with you, and then the boiler goes out in January, and then you're really the bad landlord. I think having little lunches and wine and cheese parties, or whatever you can, getting to know each other socially outside of the context of work is also really important for the culture of the organization. People come into our building and they say, there's so much joy here, right? Even our program officers, foundations, there's just so much joy here. That is because we put a lot of energy into building positive relationships with everybody who uses the building. It takes a lot of time. You need one person who's just dedicated to this. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about staffing, but you could ask me questions later if you want. But we do have somebody who's just dedicated to these relationships, and she's was born for this job. The most extroverted, outgoing, charming, and likable person. And she does a lot of collaborative programming. So that's important, is who's the person? Is it your facilities person who's their point contact? Probably not a good idea. You want someone who's much more of an external relations person working with these groups. So this is, so this is our theater. The theater was intentionally not part of the tax credit project, because we wanted to save this to be able to generate some revenue to subsidize all the other things I'm talking about in the community center. The first year I was here, we got an offer for this theater from McDonald's. We were losing the building, I couldn't make payroll, and McDonald's wanted to give us a ton of money for this theater, and I came really close. And I remember thinking, I'm turning McDonald's down, and now we're going to lose the building. Smart move, right? And then what am I going to tell people? Oh, I wanted to maintain the integrity of our Art Deco theater. Anyways, I held out, and that was the right thing to do. We did find a nonprofit tenant that promotes alternative jazz and up and coming musicians, and they needed a bigger space, and we worked together to develop capital monies for the build out. This lease is a 20-year lease, and I felt like I was getting married. It took us 9 months to negotiate this lease. It's just like marriage, who's going to take out the trash, and who's going to deal with security issues, and is the fire alarm, hooked up to our panel, and so all of those details needed to be worked out. We spent a lot of time building trust before we signed that lease. We have Jim and I have a great relationship. He's the president of the nonprofit that runs our theater. It also brings in about $13,000 a month in revenue. So it was definitely the right decision, but we put a lot of thought and care into making this a good relationship, and this is what it looks like now. It's beautiful, yeah. Staff will turn over. you know, you love this executive director and they move in and things are great and then she leaves, right? So making sure that you're really, like, your lease and your agreements are foolproof. It doesn't matter who's in that position. The expectation is really clear to everybody. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any questions for any of our panelists? Yes, Jessica.
It's not more of a question, I just wanted to echo what Martha was talking about. We're doing partnership on a much smaller scale, and one of the huge lessons learned for us on two projects that are going well, one project's not going so well, the other project is going well, is that we entered into a partnership with a municipal organization, a police department, much different culture, much different in terms of hierarchy, and sort of like our way or the highway, and didn't even want to identify their organization in our building as the YW. They wanted like to be completely separate, even though they were leasing space from us. So I really sort of, when she was talking about how you kind of start out with the best of intentions and you move over, and then the second partnership with the university, you learn some lessons along the way, and that relationship's much different. We go to lunch every month together, very mission aligned, and having a larger building, not much as big as hers, but having a larger building and being able to bring in partners has truly made our model a lot more attractive to funders and the community in general. So I just wanted to sort of piggyback on what she said.
A question for Kathleen. You talked about the utility split with your new partner for the building. For building reserve, do they take care of the center that they purchased and you do the rest of the building? Is there shared for roof or parking lot?
Is it red? Press the button and you.
Yeah, it's shared for the entire building based on the size, and parking lots are the same. No, it's not split 50-50. They have to pay a bigger portion because they have more square footage in the building.
Any other general questions? I know we had to chase Monique and Isaac off. Are there any from that session? Or Monica, did you have a question?
I just had a question. Is it possible to get to send out a copy of maybe you can have names or something out of it, but just an example of one of the contracts, because we're actually getting ready to do exactly that and open up our space to collaborative partners, and I was just curious to see maybe a sample contractual agreement that you had with them. I don't know where she is. Oh, there you go. I don't know if you're willing to share a sample of that and send it out, or maybe just send it to those who are interested. It would be helpful just to see one, just to see kind of what you put in it.
Yeah.
But again, if you want to take out names and stuff, that's fine.
So we actually create an individualized agreement for every organization that we partner with. And as I said, we have two kinds of partnerships. We have nonprofits that reside in our building, and then we have civic groups and nonprofits that utilize our building for their programming, but their actual offices are not in the building. So it's two different kinds of leases. What we do with the groups that are they're providing a service that our constituents are using, is we allow them to use the building for free or at a very deeply subsidized rate. The rule was if your membership is open and free to the public, then you can meet here for free. If it's a closed meeting, like a board meeting, then you have to pay. But if you're a nonprofit, you get a discount on that. So it's a deep, subsidized, right? And the theater kind of helps pay for all of that. Otherwise, we really wouldn't be able to do it. So it's a business model that we were just lucky that we had a building with a theater. For the organizations that are in the building long-term with their offices and their programming, each agreement is a little bit different. So we have one right now. The organization does a lot of academic support for students. So in return for a reasonable amount of rent, they actually do SAT tutoring for free for our girls in high school. So it's just one example of how we're able to use, there's another organization in the building that does advocacy with youth. And so they did all of our advocacy training for our girls. So we've been really intentional of like, gee, what's our next program? Oh, Immigrant Women's Services. Well, there's an organization that does, free legal work with the immigrant community. Having them in the building would be really helpful for that program. So that and we actually put in like a rider that says, I'm going to do this number of tutoring sessions every week. If I do more than that, you're going to pay me this amount. So yeah, we really looking at how our constituents can benefit. And I would say that's one way we've evolved. Is that, at the beginning I was really thinking about how are we helping grassroots organizations serving women and girls, and now I'm thinking about how are we helping our constituents, right? Because we found that they weren't particularly grateful for that, and we weren't getting anything in return. So we were incubating these small nonprofits, but we hadn't set up really clear expectations before they moved in the building.
So if you're negotiating each of them individually, are you working with an attorney to do that, or are you doing that all in-house?
So we have a pro bono real estate attorney, and I would definitely advise you all to try to get a pro bono real estate attorney if you can, who is really very good at working with people who are not real estate attorneys. And if we're doing, for example, we were working with a local hospital to put in a women's health center. We have a suite of offices on the first floor. He was working with me, and they were not a good partner. And he really was able to work that through. We ended up deciding not to go with them, which was definitely the right choice. But I'm not sure I would have been able to figure that out on my own. And this just happened, less than a year ago. I work with a real estate attorney on all of this. The writers are much more about programming, right? But it is part of the lease, and yes, it is something that the real estate attorney handles. The other thing is that if there's something sticky in the lease, it's much better for them to deal with the attorney than to deal with you. Because if they just see you as a landlord, that relationship's always going to be tense, right? But if they're dealing with the attorney when they're talking about the money and the terms and all of that, and then you're inviting them to wine and cheese, you get to be the good guy, right? And then there's a problem, you send them back to the attorney. So we've worked with the same firm for about 10 years, and they've been really fantastic, wonderful partners. They also helped us with all our construction loans and dealing with, contractors and architects and owners reps and developers and all of that. So they've been really involved. Yeah.
Monica?
I was going to ask if we were planning to put together a centralized location for, and I think I know the answer, for information and advisors. The question was asked earlier by someone, who do I call, who do I ask? And I think that's a common question, and I could just say that I think the YWCA National Capital Area is a cautionary tale in what happens when a lot of well-intended people give you bad advice because they don't know any better. And so, I think it's really important and very imperative, because it is true. We owned lots of property, and some of the most valuable property in the city 4 decades ago. And then 2 decades ago, we're now sold. We've sold 4 buildings in 20 years. But also, ask a lot of people, as has been shared earlier, because sometimes people who are experts in one area seem like they should know things in a different area, and they really don't. And I'll give a quick example. We're undergoing a number of changes. We're making some plans, and we decided we needed to do some new banking relationships, and so working with someone, we put out an RFP. And it just happened in a conversation we have a small endowment that was gifted to us in the 1930s, and it's managed by an investment banking organization, and we mentioned it to our investment bankers, and they said, oh, I don't think anybody is going to work with you on that. Nobody will finance that, and this is why. And we were like, oh, okay, whatever. So we sent out RFPs to 15 banks. 13 of them responded positively. So again, had we gone with their advice, which was like, oh, never mind, I guess we can't do this, we would have then not continued to pursue what we're pursuing. So it seems like investment bankers should know something about banking. But in fact, in this very specific instance, their lack of knowledge about what we were trying to do reflected in their poor advice. That we didn't follow it, but just so people know that sometimes someone who's really an expert in some area gives you advice that you feel is trustworthy because their expertise is trustworthy, but their expertise is not in this area. So.
And I think several of the presenters carried that forward in terms of having conversations with as many people as you can to find out what you don't know. Like the deeper you get in, the more you probably don't know. But you are on that path to finding out and evaluating and learning that information. As for the resources that USA wants to commit to, I know Alejandra's going to speak to that a little bit. The survey asked a couple of different questions that are going to inform us right off the bat. What are ways that YWCA USA can support you? And what are 3 deliverables that you want to see? So I think that's going to be very rich information. There could be other thoughts in terms of support and deliverables after our time here today. But we definitely are, we're in it to win it in this space right now. And it's new and challenging. We also don't know what we don't know yet, but I think the commitment is definitely there.
I think this is for Kathleen. Kathleen, did you get an opinion from an attorney about whether or not the rent is UBIT considered unrelated business income tax?
I'm sorry, whether the rent is what?
Is subject to UBIT, that's unrelated business income tax. So
I don't know that that was the case, but I can tell you that we had 2 board members who were both attorneys. One of them was a real estate attorney who drafted all the documents and took a look at all of that when we put it in place.
And then I guess my second question is, you mentioned that you created a condominium. So, and then you said you're a 501c3. We're thinking about doing this, and that's why I'm asking. That you're a 501c3, but whatever they're called, the grade line?
Yeah, it's a limited liability company.
Right. So do they have to pay real estate taxes?
They do.
They do. Okay.
They do.
And was that a difficult process to subdivide?
Well, it was a difficult process in terms of they had to come up with 2 legal descriptions for it was one legal description, it had to become 2 tracks, so it was 2 separate legal descriptions.